Hello there everyone, my name is Jeff and I'm here on behalf of Spore Harvest to tell you that this story contains sexual scenes and or gore. If you are disturbed by any of these things, you should click off the video now. Okay then, the rest of you, come right in. Enjoy the show.
Fallen, written by Patrick12345. Chapter 2, Antics. Twilight walked upstairs towards her bedroom when she was halted by a noise in the bathroom. She walked up to the door and saw it was cracked open. She peeked into the room and saw Arcantos stroking his dick, keeping it aimed down at the toilet. "Gods, your hands," he mumbled. A few words were too quiet for her to hear. "Keep going." Twilight blushed brightly and found she couldn't take her eyes away. His hand slid up over his tip, covering part of his shaft in his pre. He moaned quietly. "Almost there." His dick throbbed redly in his hands. Twilight's body started to get a little hotter as she stared intently at his hands moving across the massive member he so easily lugged around. "Oh, gods, I love you, Twilight," he mumbled. Twilight's legs weakened slightly, causing her to stumble forward. The door flew open and she landed roughly on the floor, her breast squishing against it, giving him a perfect view of them as she looked up at him. Ark's eyes widened and he exploded into and onto the toilet, giving it a new white sheen. He looked down at Twilight, meeting her eyes. Twilight stared awkwardly at him. She mumbled. Ark's mouth moved as he tried to force something to say. Twilight's horn flared up and she vanished immediately. Ark mumbled a little as he stared blankly at where she just was. After a few moments he snapped out of his daze and quickly pulled up his pants. He quickly started to wipe down the toilet. After a few minutes he quietly stepped out of the bathroom and glanced around. He saw Twilight's bedroom door was open and quickly peeked in, seeing her in the bed and under the covers. "Twilight?" he said uncertainly. "In here," she replied reluctantly. "I just wanted to say I'm going to sleep on the couch," he said. Twilight sat up quickly. "No," she said. "I mean, you can sleep in here still, if you want." "Oh, okay, I guess I will then," Ark said as he took a few small steps into the room. "And about that thing." "Yeah, no, it's, fine," she said uncertainly. "Okay." He nodded as he slowly climbed onto the bed. Twilight lay down again, facing away from him. Ark removed his shirt and dropped it to the ground, also slipping off his pants. He got under the covers and rolled away from Twilight, his back slightly pressing against hers. Twilight tensed up slightly, feeling his surprisingly warm skin against hers. A window close to the bed had been left wide open and a cold breeze flowed in, chilling the air inside the room. "You, are kind of hot," Twilight said. "Oh, thanks," Ark said. "I mean, literally, not in that way. I mean, you are, but no, it's," she stammered. "And thank you again," he said. "It's only natural for a pyromancer's body to be hot." "Oh, okay," she said. She slowly turned to face him and scooted closer. His hand reached back and grabbed hers, gently tugging it to his chest. "You don't have to be ashamed if you're cold," he said. "I don't mind sharing with someone who's been really kind to me." "You sure shared a lot in my bathroom," she mumbled. "I actually think it was a little selfish," he said quietly. Twilight blushed a little. She said quietly. He gently rubbed her hand and kept silent. Twilight pressed her body against his. "Well, good night," she said. Ark rolled over and faced her. Twilight stared wide-eyed at his chest, which she was now facing and pressed against. Ark wrapped his arms lightly around her. "You still seem to be a little cold," he said. "A little," she said. "I meant it," he said quietly. "Well, huh?" she mumbled, seeming a little out of it. "Don't worry about it," he said. "Okay, I'm going to close my eyes now," she said. "Good night," he said softly as he closed his eyes. He unconsciously laid his head down right above hers. She felt his hot breath run down across her face. A small smile formed on her face as she nuzzled herself against him, closing her eyes and drifting off to sleep in his warm embrace. The next morning, Twilight opened her eyes and looked up at him, seeing he was still asleep. She then felt something hard lightly press against her stomach. She looked down and saw his erection, raging in full, poking out the top of his underwear, pointing straight up at her. She stared intently at it. Her hand reached down slowly and touched it. Ark sighed quietly, but remained asleep. His dick throbbed slightly, and a droplet of pee formed at his tip. Twilight stared for a moment before slowly scooping it up and observing it as it ran down her hand. Ark shifted around a little, his eyes slowly opening. Twilight brought her hand to her face and started licking his pee off it. His eyes widened as he watched her lick the pee up. His dick seemed to harden even more, now stretching the band of his underwear as it attempted to get free. Twilight looked down at his dick, still not realizing he had woken up. She scooped up more from the tip of his dick and licked it off her hand. Ark moaned softly, avoiding tightening his grip around her. Her eyes shifted up quickly to his face and froze as she realized he was awake. He saw some of his own pee slightly dripping down her lips. Good morning," he said quietly, licking his lips a little as his eyes shifted to her lips. Yeah," she said, unconsciously licking it off her lips. He placed his hand on her cheek. "You've got a little something right here," he said, moving his face closer to hers. Twilight's breathing got a little heavier as she felt his breath on her face. She slowly mirrored him and brought hers closer as well. Let me get it for you," he said, lightly pressing his lips to hers and quickly pulling back. Twilight stared blankly into space for a moment. She quickly put her lips back to his. His grip on her tightened a little as he held her in the kiss. She closed her eyes and her hand instinctively moved down, sliding against his dick. He moaned into her mouth and his hand moved up to her ass, slightly pulling aside her nightgown to grasp her bare skin. His hand started to slowly heat up. She pulled back and gasped, staring deeply into his eyes. He stared back. "Twilight?" he said softly. "You have something on your face." She panted softly, pulling him back into the kiss. He opened his mouth up to let her in. Her tongue darted into his mouth and her hand wrapped around his dick, sliding into his underwear. The head he had on her ass started to generate a small pulsating heat. Once that started, he gently squeezed and massaged her ass cheek, his fingers pressing a little deeper into her flesh. Twilight moaned loudly into his mouth and pulled her head away. "Ark," she breathed. "Twilight," Ark said softly. "Take off my clothes and tear me open," she whispered. He slipped off her nightgown within a few seconds. He continued to massage her ass with one hand while he clumsily unhooked her bra. Twilight's horn flickered quickly and his underwear was torn off. Ark let go of her body and gently pushed her onto her back. He climbed over top of her and looked down at her, admiring her now uncovered breasts. He smiled and with one hand started teasingly grinding his dick against the outside of her panties. Twilight gripped the blankets and moaned quietly. Her hips moved slowly in tune with his teases. Ark pulled her panties slightly to the side before pressing his tip against her entrance. She gasped loudly. "It's so hot," she panted. "I can make it hotter if you want," he said as he started prodding her. She moved her hands down and started stroking it almost feverishly. "Oh God, it..." she mumbled. He moaned and pushed his head into her. "So much better," he mumbled. Twilight let out a sharp scream that was quickly drowned out by her moans. "Too big," she stammered. He pulled his head out. "I don't want to hurt you," he said. Twilight looked up at him. "You're not, it's just I have to get used to it." She smiled. But what?" Ark asked, pressing his tip against her lips again, spreading them slowly apart. The only thing that hurts is not having you inside me," she moaned. He leaned down and pressed his lips against hers as he pushed the first inch into her. She wrapped her arms around him and held as still as her trembling body would allow. A few moments later, the door was thrown open and Spike walked in. Ark tensed up and jumped forward a little. His leg instantly slid fully into Twilight. "Oh, fuck!" Twilight screamed loudly, her whole body locking up. Spike stared wide-eyed at the two before doing an immediate 180 and running out. Ark panted heavily and looked down at Twilight, his entire body trembling a little. "Holy, it's been years since I've been with a woman, but you're holy, gah!" he mumbled. "So good, you're..." she stammered, her pussy immediately trying to force him deeper and milking him. He started sliding back out despite the resistance. He barely removed the tip before making his return into her. Her moans grew in volume. "Keep going, fuck me," she begged loudly. "It's our first time. Let's savor this for a little longer," he moaned as he thrust back into her. Twilight nodded slowly and shakily, her arms tightening around him and strengthening her grip. I love you," she said. "I love you too," he said, kissing her neck. His thrusting started to get a little faster. Her mouth fell open a little wider. "So good," she moaned. So are you gonna have trouble balancing now?" He smiled. She seemed to laugh slightly before falling back to an unaware state as she bathed in the pleasure he was giving her. His dick heated up a little more and he started thrusting a little harder. He grunted as he squeezed her a little more. Her hips started bucking roughly. "Rack me harder, please," she shouted. He thrusted even harder, causing the bed to shift a little with every thrust. His head started ramming at her cervix with a greater force. As she came, her pussy spasmed violently around him. "Yes, stuff me with babies," she screamed loudly. Ark didn't stop on his pull-out and his dick popped out of her pussy. What are you doing?" she asked, staring up at him pleadingly. Ark pressed his lips tightly to hers before roughly ramming his heated shaft back into her. His thrusting had gotten rougher, and now the headboard was continuously hitting the wall, making the already loud sounds of their sex even more pronounced. She immediately screamed into his mouth, her eyes rolling back as the pleasure became unbearable, simply melting into the kiss as all her senses melded together. His hand shot up to her breast and he started to massage and tease it. Twilight's legs twitched and kicked at the air while her nails dug into his back. Ark pulled back from the kiss and pressed his head in between her breasts. His moans and gasps got louder as he got closer to his orgasm. His thrust seemed to increase in force as he was trying to bash his way deeper into her. Twilight's magic sparked uncontrollably, surrounding the two, making them both feel as if a warm blanket was draped over them. Ark gave one final thrust before his now superheated cum was blasted into her. He moaned loudly, and after the first wave he started thrusting again, causing his cum to be mixed around in her pussy. She let out an almost choked gasp as her ability to even moan was muffled by the pleasure she felt, letting out a weak grunt or sputter every so often. The hand on her breast moved down to over top of where his dick was, and she felt his cum start to amass at that point. Shortly after it started, he pulled his pen dick out of her. He slowly shifted all of it up to where the wound was. All of the hot cum moved in. Her attention snapped back to reality immediately. Wait, she said quickly. He silenced her with his other finger. You won't, he said, slowly dragging his hand back. The cum flooded back out into her pussy, causing it to expand slightly to fit every drop of it. Huh? She mumbled, letting out a small moan. He slowly guided the ball of cum out of her pussy. She stared at it, noticing the light blue glow in it. Magic? She questioned. Yes, he nodded. And, being that it is all yours now, where do you want it? He asked. She stared at it for a moment before licking her lips. She opened her mouth and stared at him patiently. He guided the cum into her mouth and let it slip down her throat before letting go of it. She mumbled happily. You taste amazing. Ark slipped under the blankets and he covered up her lower body, hiding himself from view. What are you? She mumbled before a spike of pleasure hit her. Oh. She felt her panties get pulled off and she heard him breathe in deeply. Shortly after, there was a deep exhale, followed by another spike of pleasure. Twilight bit her lip and smiled widely. I think it's your turn to do the tasting. She giggled softly. Ark pushed his tongue past her lips and lightly grazed his teeth against them. He pulled back a moment later. First, an amazing kisser. Then, you knew just how to drive me crazy. Now, you smell incredible and I could get addicted to your taste, he said. She moaned softly. You're the only drug I need, she panted. He nibbled on her clit. She yelped loudly. Oh yeah, she sighed. He teased and licked her lips. His hand shot up and he grabbed her breast, increasing the pleasure she was feeling. She rocked her hips, grinding her slit against his face. Nah! How? She mumbled shortly after she moaned loudly. So good. He pressed his tongue beyond her lips, tickling her walls as he pushed deeper in. Twilight made a noise that sounded halfway between a moan and a giggle. Ark slowly pulled his tongue back out and slowly slid back up her body, his face still wet with her juices. He smiled mischievously as he looked down into her eyes. What are... She was cut off as he pressed his lips to hers. She instantly opened her mouth, and instead of his tongue, he had managed to collect a decent amount of her own cum, which now slid into her mouth. He continued massaging her breasts and moaned quietly into her mouth. Her eyes shut tightly and she moaned into his mouth. When he pulled back, their tongues slid apart, leaving a long trail of saliva between their mouths. She smiled a little and moaned softly as he squeezed her nipple. You know how to make a girl feel special, don't you? She giggled. I guess I know how to show a truly special woman exactly what she is. He smiled. He planted kisses down her neck and slowly licked her breasts. Twilight bit her lip as he slowly licked around her nipple, his tongue gently tickling and teasing it. She watched him intently. Ark took her nipple into his mouth and the hand he had on that breast slipped down through in between her legs. He slid 2 fingers into her and gently pistoned them. Yes, she moaned. Ark suckled and nibbled her nipple, drawing a small stream of milk from it. He closed his eyes and started sucking a little harder. His thumb started pressuring her clit, moving it around as he pistoned his fingers. Twilight's head fell back onto a pillow and she lay there limply, basking in the treatment her lover was giving her. He lightly bit down on her nipple. She yelped loudly and bucked her hips, forcing his hand to slam against her pussy. His other hand suddenly slipped down lower. He traced a finger around her asshole. She shivered a little and moaned quietly. Please, make me come, she begged. He removed both his hands from her lower body and she felt his erect dick again press against her lips. She bit her lip and stared at him. Ark pulled off her breasts. This time, you're in charge. He smiled, rolling her over with him. Twilight was now on top of him, her soaked pussy against his muscled stomach. She smiled and leaned down, kissing him as she raised her hips up and slammed it down over his dick, hilting him instantly. 20 minutes later. Twilight nuzzled herself against his chest. She was still panting heavily after the last round.
After that, I'm pretty sure no one else is going to fit me anymore,
she joked. Well, I don't want anyone else, Ark said, kissing her forehead. I've got everything I could ever need right here. She smiled widely.
So do I,
she said.
I've got a man who's a great cook, incredibly warm and cuddly, a massive package, knows a lot about magic, and who knows just how to make me feel incredible.
Why would you need me to show you the truth? He smiled.
It doesn't hurt to have someone showing me constantly,
she said. He yawned. I could go right back to sleep, he said, hugging her closer. Twilight nuzzled his chest again.
So could I.
She yawned. Then let's just sleep, he said.
That sounds good.
She cut herself off. What's wrong? He asked.
My brother and sister-in-law are coming to see me today,
she said.
I can't sleep anymore. I need to get a shower. I need to make sure Spike doesn't tell him about...
Ark silenced her with a finger. We need to take a shower, and why hide anything if we're being serious about being in love? He asked.
It's just, you aren't from here, and my brother gets really protective,
she said. That's even better. He smiled.
Why?
She asked. Now you have 2 people who are going to be protective of you, he said, hugging her again. She smiled and returned a warm embrace. Now, let's go take that shower, he said softly. Twilight stepped into the shower and turned it on. The warm water rushed out of the shower head, washing over her body. Ark stepped in behind her. He reached over her and grabbed a bottle of soap. He popped open the cap and brought it back to his nose. He mumbled. She giggled a little.
Hey, I need that,
she said, trying to grab it from him. He chuckled and kept it out of reach. Nuh-uh. He smiled. He used his other hand to turn her back around. Let me wash you. She seemed a little taken aback by his statement.
Oh,
she mumbled.
That's new.
Give it enough time, he said, draping his arms over her.
Fortunately, that's just what I have.
Twilight smiled. Where do you want me to start? He asked, leaning up and lightly nipping the tip of her ear.
Why don't you start from the top and make your way down?
She whispered, placing a slow but quick kiss on his lips. He smiled a little. He poured a little shampoo into his hand and ran his soaped-up hand through her hair. His other hand was lathered with soap, and he grasped her breast and started massaging it. Like this? He asked, kissing her cheek. She sighed softly.
Yeah,
she said. He finished up with her hair and chest, so he stepped back and rubbed soap onto both his hands. He looked up and down her back and smiled to himself.
Something wrong?
She asked, not looking back at him and continuing to let the water run down her chest. No, he said, starting a slow back and shoulder massage. Oh, I was wrong.
What is it?
She asked. Don't worry, it's nothing that I won't be able to fix, he said as he started rolling her upper back muscles to loosen them up. It's a good thing our species are so similar.
Very similar,
she cooed, her ass gently rubbing back against his dick. He slowly moved down her back. I may just take you up on that offer, he said, sliding his slightly erect cock in between her ass cheeks.
I think you already have.
She giggled quietly, looking back and giving him another kiss. Both his hands moved down to her ass cheeks, massaging both them and his dick. His fully erect and throbbing shaft rubbed against her asshole.
Good to know we're both so good at massaging each other,
she moaned. He reached over her and grabbed another bottle of soap. She felt it get squirted in between her ass cheeks, lathering both them and his dick up.
What are you doing?
She asked, with a little curiosity and slight hint of dread building inside her. He paused and stopped trying to prep for anal. Nothing, he said.
Did you, want to do that?
She asked half hesitantly. You don't want to, so I won't. I'll wait until you're ready, he said, kissing her cheek.
Well, I know one thing we can do with that. We wouldn't want to waste perfectly good soap,
she said, bending over and putting her hands on the wall in front of her. He grabbed her hips and shifted his cock down to her entrance. After what we've done, I think it would need a nice cleaning, he said.
You're right, I've been a very dirty girl,
she said, grinding herself against the tip of his throbbing member. Ark shoved himself in, stuffing her full within a second of his head passing through her lips. He grunted as he leaned down over her. Holy damn, even after 2 rounds you're still strangling me, he mumbled.
You'd be surprised at what I can recover from,
she joked strainfully before letting out a loud moan. At this rate, I'm going to be the one recovering, he chuckled as he started to thrust. Twilight mumbled, his cock managing to hit different areas than the last time. Ark wrapped his arms around her stomach. He started to laugh weakly as his body was flooded with pleasure.
What's so funny?
Twilight questioned through moans. How I've gone from being free to under your power, he said.
What?
She began. And how much I love it, he said, kissing her neck.
Fuck,
she moaned. Her pussy spasmed as she came. Ark started thrusting harder into her. Gods, you're perfect, he mumbled. Her arm brushed the shower dial, changing the water temperature from its original hot temperature to an icy cold one.
Shut up.
Twilight blushed, her body now shaking because of both the cold water rushing over her body and the force of his thrusts.
I am not perfect.
You're right, Ark nodded in agreement.
What?
Twilight's eyes widened and she was about ready to force him off. To say you're perfect is an understatement. It puts you down from what you really are, Ark said, kissing her neck and cheek. There are no words for what you are. Twilight's blush grew brighter and she contracted even more around him, her pussy now desperately trying to milk him. I love you, Ark grunted as his thrusting got even harder.
I love too,
she panted shakily as another orgasm rocked her body. He hilted himself inside of her, his thick, almost boiling cum poured into her. So much came out with the first shot that the rest just flowed out of her pussy and onto the shower floor. The water steamed as it washed the cum down the drain.
Hot, so hot.
Twilight mumbled, another orgasm forcing its way through her body. Ark was panting heavily as he pulled out and stepped back from Twilight. And I thought last round was the best, he said through his heavy pants.
Yeah, the cold water really adds a thrill.
Twilight shivered, standing as straight as what just happened would allow. Ark pulled her back into his arms. So, he said, do you want to get out now or just stay like this for a little bit?
Either works, so long as you're with me.
She smiled, kissing his forehead. He kissed her on the lips. As much as I want to just keep you all to myself, family is important too, he said.
That's why I'm happy you're here. That way I'll never be far from them.
She smiled. Despite the water still being on, she could see a few tears run down his face. Twilight wrapped her arms around him tightly.
I love you,
she said. I love you too, Ark said. My princess. Well, that escalated quickly. I hope you enjoyed this next chapter of Fallen, and if you did, hit that like button and subscribe. And here is your daily dose of brainwashing.
Nederlust nou meer fiep. Zie me als ik wel op joost zit. Het namelijk je zich al op. Het zijn vragen op zich nauwelijks.
Bye.